Es gibt eine ganz neue Brennerei, Holyrood Distillery in Edinburgh, und ich habe die Möglichkeit gehabt, dann dort tatsächlich eine Führung zu machen. Und das war besser als überhaupt erwartet. We make the spirit, the city makes us. Natürlich am Anfang haben sie angefangen über Gin zu reden, weil sie halt eben Gin verkaufen. Allerdings der Rest der Zeit ging es um Whisky-Herstellung. Dafür schlägt das Herz. Ich werde tatsächlich 4-mal deren New Make hier besorgen und dann ein Tasting machen und wahrscheinlich ein Fass dort kaufen. So, Test, Learn, Improve, Repeat ist deren Slogan und die beziehen ihre Gerste da von Simpsons Malt und von Crisp. So, wir werden jetzt eine Führung da haben von Stuart. Ich hoffe, ihr könnt ihn gut verstehen, es hat Spaß gemacht und ganz am Ende werde ich noch ein paar Sätze sagen.
Now, before I dive into everything, I'm going to assume that at least one of you doesn't know what single malt Scotch actually means. So single means that our distillery isn't married to erwerben. It means it's a singular distillery, singular product, singular setup, singular goal. When it comes to malt, it means malted barley. Only barley is being used when it comes to the malting stage, and it's only ever malted barley, no unused malted barley. Irish whiskey can use unmalted barley as well. I believe they call it a different type of whiskey entirely. The name escapes me admittedly, but I'm Scottish, not Irish, so that's my justification. Now, Scotch just means Scottish. You can get single malt Irish, single malt Japanese. It's just to make sure that what you're drinking is known for being a tremendously delicious Scottish product. And that's why we put Scotch at the end of names of things, you know, or at the beginning. So Scotch whiskey, Scotch eggs, Scotch pies, Scotch pancakes. Scotch tape is actually Canadian though, so there's a bit of context there for you. So even if it's got target on it, it is usually Scottish. You know, kilts. Now, when it comes to the first and second stages, which is the malting and the milling, we don't do this. We don't need to. It is quite well established to have companies do it for you. Those that do it themselves have been doing it for a very long time, and it's kind of a, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. Malting is about trickling nature. It's about trickling the barley. It's about activating the starch, the fuel of that barley inside, and it's getting that energy going by steeping the grain in that water over several days. This is great, but we don't want it to grow too much. We don't want to feel the barley. So we dry the grain. And how we dry the grain is where our experiments begin. So, traditionally you would quite commonly use a kiln. A kiln is placing an oven underneath or a porous floor in which the grains are now sitting. This is an option of fuel source. In its natural state, it's as delicious as it looks. But, and the amount of times I've seen people try to smell this when I'm not looking is quite funny. But yeah, so in its natural state, it's useless, apart from being a very good takeaway. But as a fuel source, it's not bad. We use it as fires in people's houses and things like that in the middle of nowhere in Scotland, but we can use it as a fuel source in the kiln, fueling that kiln, and when you release the smoke from this, the properties of that smoke's flavour will soak into the grain because it's incredibly soft at this point in the grain. It soaks in anything that's exposed. And this is where things get pretty good. This is peat from bogs, P-E-A-T, and bogs are different all over the world. Scotland, they're all different all over the world. Islay, the capital of peat, basically, are actually closer to Ireland than they are to Scotland, to give an idea of how far into the water their island is. So they have a lot of seaweed in their bogs, a lot of seaweed in their peat. This helps the actual intensity that they're known for. Plus, the greater proportion of smoke that they actually expose the grain to in terms of duration. That's great. There's lots of opportunity. We explore their options, explore their intensities, but it's not just their peat we use. We've used Aberdeenshire peat as well, which I think is more of a barbecue kind of smell and taste to it. Really interesting, a nice creamy texture that we've achieved as well. It's not just simply, oh, it's smoke, it's smoke. It's a bit more than that. Kind of how diluting juice, if you drink nothing but diluting juice in the water, it's going to be quite overly concentrated, but the more you add of water, it changes things. Same goes for whiskey in general. It's all about this kind of like exposure. Intensity is a word. Now, that's one option, which is optional, as I said. The others are where things get really good. So our crystal malt, our chocolate malt, never not crystal malt, chocolate. Crystal malt is toasted, and chocolate malt is roasted. And to give a bit more of a relatable example why we have to be careful when these are done. When you're roasting a coffee bean to achieve where it is, because it's the natural state of coffee beans green, it is losing caffeine. But very little, but the starch reaction loses a lot of it when we are roasting. So we have to be careful. But this is where it's commonly known, and the good news is, a little goes a long way. Guinness, to give an example, 5% of Guinness is only chocolate. But that colour and that classic flavour of stout that Guinness has is from there. So it's great for that. But craft stouts where more accessible just have more chocolate. But yield is affected. But this is not big of a deal. We usually are about 10% being of chocolates and crystal malts, etc. We have gone as high as 30. Recently, we have gone as high as 18 because we thought that's a nice place to be, part of our experiment. But 30 is something we're still exploring ourselves when we first opened. But they will be some of the first whiskies we'll be releasing, so I'm particularly excited because I do like to start. Now, crystal malt, very commonly used in a lot of beers. It's about adding sweetness, crystal malt, caramel, crystallized sugars to make caramelized. It's all about that kind of sweetness. It's great. But as I said, we use only so much of it, and we've got different combinations as well. So this is what's been made this week. We've got a heavy Isle of Peat, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was like 50 parts per million. And we've got Maris also, which is a heritage malt, which is really helpful for the interesting textures. And we've also got Amber malt, which is a slightly less sweetened version of like crystal. So it's kind of gentle, but it's got more of a like kind of more of a brownie red kind of sweetness, if you get what I mean. So it's kind of really interesting. And then we've got the yeast, which we'll be diving into soon. We've got a Norwegian ale yeast right here, and we've got a distillers yeast to help assist it to get the alcohol content we need, and some interesting flavors alongside itself as well. But no matter what, the grains need to be milled. So once that's done for us, it will look like this. And this was called the grist, Grist. The grist is then introduced to the container behind me here, the mash tun, which is a boiler basically. It looks super fancy. If you look inside, it looks like a big food mixer with a sieve at the bottom. That's not wrong because it does mix stuff and it does have a sieve. But the water is introduced inside there, and the water is going to use to activate the starch, activate the sugars, turn the enzymes to the sugars, and it will drain through. The amount of water we use is 6,500 litres against 1.25 tonnes. And we go to 15 tonnes a week. And after this process has been achieved, we don't need this anymore. In single malt anyway. So single malt we don't need anymore. It's now called the draft, DRAFF, and the draft given to farmers is cattle feed. As many do, very common practice for a very long time. In other words, being broke to offense. But there is also other options. There's a breweries, a quantity of charity basically takes all the spent draft breweries and makes bread for the homeless. So there's different things you can do with it, even dog biscuits. Yep. So yeah, this whole job is just to get those sugars and have them drain through with that liquid, which is the wort, W-O-R-T, which is taken to the next stage. That stage is the yeast. When it was getting done in the mash tun, it smelled like a cheese and ham toasted.
Yeah.
So basically toasted cheese and ham. And that's how I smell when it comes to peat being in the implement. It just gets really interesting. But yeah, so this container was filled on the 4th, so it's been fermented for 4 days. The industry average is about 3 to 5, but this is nothing compared to what we've done in the past. We've gone as high as 16 days in our fermentation. We measure fermentation in the hours. That's how little it is compared to like beer. So beer measure in the days, I remember correctly. But when it comes to this stage, we are experimenting. This is where we significantly pay attention to the rest of the world. Not just in whiskey, but many different things. So, for example, yeast types. You know? So over here, just a visual aid for it, we've got distillers yeast, the fruits and spices and floral notes that it achieves. But beer yeast is known for a lot of citrus fruits. This is why also beer yeast are living yeast, and for that case, they do have a better achievement of the fruits. Wine yeast, as you can see there as well. But it's not just these three. Tropical wine yeast as well. And also rum, sourdough, sake, and beyond. We're even creating our own bespoke yeast. And when it comes to beer yeast as well, it's not just Norwegian and local ones from our history. We're using Belgian, German, American. It's whatever's out there that we see in a published article. This is where we really do not ignore the world. It's all about seeing what's been achieved. Because we're not the only ones experimenting with different types of yeast. Like Nick Neenan Distillery have recently just released their Huntress, which is using rum yeast. When we got the rum yeast, they were telling us, don't tell anyone you're using this because it's so niche, no one's doing it. Of course, turns out, it work. But that's the thing, it's fine. Because we even sell their products in a shop. We're not about this whole competitive, because everyone is different, especially nowadays with whiskey. We're all coming up with experiments that no one else has even thought of their mind is doing. Not just ourselves. So this is a lot of fun. This is my favorite part of the process because we're creating those congeners that gives these flavors, that achieves these congeners that exist in these actual fruits. It's all this fun, exciting time. And on a rare occasion I get to try it. But it's not like the safest thing to drink. So it's We had a private cask one that basically, I find it tastes like Leffe blonde beer, but also with tropical fruits. You would really like. There's a kind of like have you ever heard of a drink called Lilt? It's a tropical fruit drink, and it's basically that combined with Leffe blonde. I thought this is really nice. I wanted to sit down, but I was working at the time, so I had to get on with my job. But it's this exciting kind of experiment in do. But as I said, duration, 16 days have gone as long as, so we don't really have an average of fermentation. And a combination as well. So there's a new mixed spirit that you'll get to try later on. That's a combination of beer yeast and distiller's yeast. Just showing them together as that one shown there. But that one has the intention. Sometimes we just use distiller's yeast to ensure a yield. Because we need to get to 8 to 10% alcohol. And not every beer yeast and wine yeast will get us there. But distiller's yeast are good for this. But no matter what, we've got our beer created. That's what we're doing here. We're creating a beer. Our washbacks are total in 6 because this process takes so long, and then are taken to the next stage, our distillation. The reason why we're able to do this level of experimentation is that we're not the only ones doing it for us. We actually have a doctorate student doing it for us. And not all of it, so we do the research ourselves, but she's actually doing a lot of our research development, not just in what the yeast does, but how well the grains work at different roastings, and also the influence of the wood as well. So all the little things that would take an entire person's job, just sitting down, doing the research, doing the experiments, she's doing it for us as part of her doctorate. And she will be, once she finishes her doctorate, a whiskey doctor as well, which I think is the coolest thing ever. She's an absolute genius. Yeah. But yeah, so she's able to really find out in the finer details, the finer science for us, like what will work, what won't work. And with our experiments, 95% is known to fit, but the proof's in the pudding in the end. Sometimes we don't have things work out as we wanted them to. But luckily, we've actually been quite lucky. A lot of things we've been trying to do, we have achieved. Great. When it comes to the stills, we are, of course, of copper. All metals pull out the impurities when it comes to having extra casing for your still. We have stainless steels for our washbacks because it's easier cleaning. Wooden ones are perfectly fine. That's why a lot of people still use them, but they are a lot bigger and are harder to get to these shapes. And we are doing a lot of whiskey, so by having it easier cleaning with our washbacks, we have no crossover of the flavors. Yeah, half the distiller's job is cleaning, the other half is paperwork. So you can imagine how much fun it is when you're trying to make whiskey on top of that. But a very important thing to remember before I dive into this part, the washbacks is where the alcohol is created. Stills don't create alcohol, they extract and purify the alcohol. So copper, being the best for doing this, been known for about 6,000 years, is, it could take a couple of days, it's all about leading into that heritage, that history that we developed as a species. We've had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people fail and succeed to us to know now what's the right way, what's the wrong way, what's dangerous, what's successful, etc. Now, copper will be pulling out the impurities. But the gin still that you saw upstairs, that actually doesn't need to be copper because it's already got clean alcohol. So a gin still like that, or a gin still in general, will last forever as long as pressure and bolts keep themselves strong. But copper will take a battering when it comes to a whiskey still because we're developing our spirit. And that's also where you notice that it's a lot more of a kind of a muddy, darker hue than your gin stills. Now we have a reflux mill here. This is all about encouraging contact. It's all about having more of a actual contact of copper. There is more of it. But also we have gathering of vapors at here as well. It's all about that reflux, about getting it to go back down and go up again, encouraging copper contact. Now our still is 5,000 litres, as it says just here. 5,000 litres is not a big still. But our still is the second tallest in the entire country. This means a greater ratio of height, ratio of interaction with copper for what we're actually involving with our product. So it's quite handy. Glenmorangie are the tallest, but here's where it gets really good. We are the tallest by volume. That's how much significance our height is to our actual capacity, because it's quite small but very tall, 7 meters. We would go taller, but this is a listed building. We can't go higher than the roof. Even the capacity was actually limited by the doorway that it had to come through downstairs, which shaped the entire capacity for the entire production. So we hate that doorway. we could have a bigger still, even though we don't have much space anyway, so it's probably for the best. Now, windows are rare on a still. You want more copper contact as much as possible, so having a window is a bit redundant. But this is where it's actually quite cool, because when the distilling is going along nicely, the bubbling effect is hypnotic. Now, this is where it gets even better. I'm going to get a torch, and you guys better see what's actually inside. So, when it comes to a still, in our case, we have a radiator inside there, which is powered by steam, which is fueled by gas. And have a look inside. You can actually see the radiator itself. This kind of looks like an old-style looking radiator you'd expect in a house. And if you carefully see, you can actually see where the filling in, where the actual liquid comes in underneath it. And you can have a wee look around inside as well, see what actually is happening, what's in there.
Cool. Thank you.
Distillation, we're getting things done, we're getting purification. Our stills are very narrow. This is to help with the controlling of oils. Oils will be heavier, they'll have a harder time getting on the neck because the lighter ones got there first. But if we go by the system's kind of shape of it, it will have a less harshness, less oiliness presence about the spirit. However, we are battling the spirit half the time in this still shape. We are trying to force them up to match the type of whiskey. So this would help with a lot of the ones we're trying to get that kind of impression, but it doesn't limit us. It doesn't mean this will only ever mean with all of our spirits being not oily. Some spirits do much better with the flavours being oily. I don't think I need to dive into detail, but what foods in these are best like that. But it goes up and goes across our line with a line up 9 and into our first condenser. Our first condenser, just like the gin, it's got a condenser, and it releases our liquid known as the low wines. The low wines is now concentrated alcohol, no longer safe to drink. This is methanols, etc. So what we want to do, of course, is not drink this, but we do taste check any time that we feel that we need to check that the quality is good. Not a common practice. Not everyone does taste check. No. If someone does, it's like, oh, we'll fix it at the end of the aging. We're not about that. We are developing our reputation. We don't have the flexibility of things going maybe fixable later. So what we do, we make sure it's good every single time, which sounds weird, but it's not the case for everyone. And this time we check it carefully. So I'm not like a wee like pinky tap and then a wee lick, that's it. Any more than that, we kind of endanger our lives. But low wines, as it's not safe and it's also not purified enough, it needs a second distillation, as all Scottish distilleries have. It's 2 distills. Not 2 stills, but 2 distills. It doesn't have to actually have 2 stills to be, as long as it is distilled twice. Inside our second still, our spirit still, which is 3,750 litres in its capacity. So slightly smaller, which means it's slightly taller in its neck, because it's this position, you can notice it carefully. And you'll notice as well, by the windows, it's a lot cleaner. That's because any solids and any colour that is actually going in of that wash into the wash still will be lost through distillation. Anything that comes out of the wash still, anything that comes out of the spirit still, if it has a colour, something's gone wrong. It should not have a colour. And these are examples of such. So this is low wines. So even at low wines, it still has quite a bit of a yellow tinge to it. And we've got different aspects of the actual, what comes out of the spirit still at different stages. It's the exact same process as on, again, pretty much though. Goes in, goes up, goes across the line once again, but instead of just going into a condenser, it goes into this container directly above the purifier. The purifier has a water jacket around it for its heating to keep the vapors at a vapor temperature. And just as a gin still does, it keeps it hot. It's made out of copper, keeps purification going. It's additional copper content. You can look upon it in a simple way of being 2.5 distillations here, but not 2 stills. It's just to keep it there. It may be slightly experimented with to see what works best, because when we first started, we didn't actually use it that much. But more recently, the last, say, year, we've actually been exploring its abilities and functions. Also, its terminology, its name, it will change depending on what you're doing with it. It has a hatch, which, because the actual device itself can be used in more than just whiskey. So we can use things where you can add other ingredients like cured meats. And this is like, I think, a Spanish drink, I'm not entirely sure.
Mexican.
Yeah, thank you. I knew that the language was Spanish, so I got that right, so apologies for anyone who's Spanish. But yeah, so that you can add that, but we can't do that in this case, that would be an additional ingredient. But our condenser will release our new make, but it is still accompanied by the dangerous, and that's where the spirit safe comes in. Right? This we have to come back to point. So the spirit safe, original purpose, tax control. Alright, but what is happening here, low wines will exit through here. And that's where you can tell if you have a close look. That's a muddy looking bowl. That's to show you how still to be distilled the low wines is. But the heads and the hearts and the tails is what comes through these bowls here. Heads, that's the methanol. The boiling point of methanol is lower than that of ethanol. So that means we know it's going to come out of the still first, out of the condenser first, through our spirit safe first. We have hydrometers just here, which is used to measure the alcohol content, and we also have thermometers in the system as well to know the temperature as well. So we know what is happening. That's how we divert to get the ethanol, to get the hearts, the actual to-be product. And then when the tails is going to be showing itself, or water puzzle are present, and some that are nasty, unpleasant elements of the cask room. So heads, hearts, tails, which I think is hilarious because you're having a brilliant, complex process of what makes it safe for drinks when you leave it back and forth. But that's the trick of it. But it's a lot of science, a lot of trial and error of hundreds of years, and also carefully done pulling the lever, which I've done once, and I felt very excited by it. That's kind of done. And you even can see the bowl for the heads and tails is definitely not as clean as this. So even at that point, that makes sense, but even then, it shows you the cleanness, the purity of the heart itself. And this is also a really information this monitor does here. But yeah, so now we're going to go into the final room, our cask room. Welcome to the perfectly named cask room where we keep the cask, but this is not where our casks are stored. Our bonded warehouse is about 3 times the size of our actual distillery, which is even small for a bonded warehouse. And we'll be having a target, I think it's about 8,000 casks stored, and they're not going to be on their side actually, they're going to be standing, sometimes they are going to be standing on their side. I never know which ends, I always get confused, palletized, that's what I was trying to remember. So yeah, so they'll be palletized to help with space and such. Now, this room is a chance for us, of course, to have a drink, but to dive into the actual aging and its importance. Aging is great because this is what helps develop character and also finishing. And that's a very important thing to remember, the word finishing. Even though you can have additional finishing, so where you're aging bourbon, then you change to sherry, that's when you're finishing the cask. It is the cherry on top of what the whiskey is, your sundae. But it shouldn't be dependent on the aging. This is where we kind of dive into it. Aging is important to us, but we don't want it to be our focus. We want to achieve a lot of different things in our whiskey before it gets to the aging. That's why I've been talking about crystal malts, chocolate malts, exploration of peat, the exploration of different types of yeast and beyond, and also the exploration of heritage malts as well. This here is a stave. Now it is cut in half, but this is what is the end of this piece of wood that's used for constructing a cask. This is actually sourced from Speyside. And you'll see here, to get the lighting correct, there we go.
Excellent.
We have a dark, kind of chocolate kind of colour in the middle.
It's called the red line.
In America, they call it Devil's Cut. So what happens there is we are charring the inside of a cask so that we can access the actual flavours in the wood itself. American oak is high in vanilla, which is great for vanilla essence. You notice it's all about the sweetness. And because you set fire, it cracks because it tightens and it opens it up, but it turns it into a bit of a sponge and it soaks in some of the product. And Americans call it Devil's Cut because it gets taxed. So the angel share is registered for evaporating, doesn't exist anymore, therefore it doesn't get taxed. But the Devil's Cut still exists, 5% the first year on average, so it still gets taxed. And this is why Jim Beam have the Devil's Cut Jim Beam, so they can make a bit of money on something that taxed. From what I've heard, it doesn't make a single bit of difference. But apparently it's still pretty good whiskey, so that's a win. Well, that's what I've heard. People have different opinions, so it's fine. Now, that is but one aspect. The wood, as I said, has got vanillin. It's not the only type of oak we have access to, because we must use oak. It's a brilliant wood. There's been different origins of why we age. Some have basically said that you had to transport the container. You had to transport it in something when you're taking it to your buyer. And the distance was sometimes a formidable length of time. And your transport method was, horse and cart, if not, so a bit more elaborate. That's a lot of time, a lot of slow chance of actually things changing. So it noticed it had a bit of colour, it tasted different when it first got into the cask. This is where the developing of the cask influence began, as they said in this case. The funny and annoying thing about facts in the world of whiskey and its history, people are usually drinking when they're noting it down, so the fundamentals of it, is it a fact, did it actually happen, gets a bit blurry. Gin is especially known for these fuzzy facts. When it comes to European casks, such as this one here, which is a port cask, which we have actually used in the past for aging some of our blood, as well as this one, which is the made by Edinburgh sherry, Oloroso sherry cask as well. These are Spanish oak. European oak is high in those Christmas spices. Tannins is what gives that kind of influence. So it's cinnamon and nutmeg and all that great stuff. And we like that. And the made by Edinburgh, which we'll be drinking soon, that influence of that recipe from the 1800s in Edinburgh, has been aged in this very cask, which you'll now get to have a wee smell of. So let you have a wee smell of this, and also when bring your drinks, grab yourself a drink since you're right next to it. And so the made by Edinburgh, which you're drinking of and have a nice smell of the influence of the sherry that we're got aging for it, has got some interesting fruitiness from its yeast, the Edinburgh ale yeast. and also some interesting kind of like complexities. It is the most complex of the 4 new makes that we are available for online and on shop, etc. But it is quite a popular favourite, and we've actually been exploring cocktails with the new makes as well. This one's actually really good. Pairs really well with a sherry-based cocktail. So there's one I named the Scottish Inquisition because it's, you know, you put Spanish sherry into it. But yeah, so it's just about this kind of fun you can do with the mix. It's not attached to the restrictions, if you like, that whiskey sometimes has. I'm like, oh, whiskey cocktail, because it's new make. Cocktail, like mixologists, when we talk to cocktail bars, like, ooh, this seems new, this got interesting. They just pay attention to the flavour. They're like, oh, this would work great in this. We've got that crystal malt I mentioned earlier. I've talked to people who know their cocktails, saying popcorn syrup with this, maybe some milk, you know, a kind of a Kahlua kind of mix with things like, you know, it'll probably taste like sweet and cinema. You know that kind of fun kind of interaction that you can connect. You would have thought cinema would connect to whiskey. It's just that kind of fun you can do with our new mix. It's quite great. But yeah, so aging is a lot of fun. However, the world of it has changed, especially since education of how it all works and how the world is changing to adapt and demand. When it comes to, trying to think of the best way of doing this. Yeah, so come over here. So when it comes to this here, the Devil's Cut, the access to that flavour, this is great. But the angel share, as we call it, the evaporation that happens every single year, it's different all over the world. This room is cold, not because that room is warm in comparison when we walk out of it, it's because it's kept cold. This is what it would feel like in the modern world. You can't have heating in it because it's away from the natural environment of the country you're in, how it would have aged if it wasn't exposed to heating. So, angel share in Scotland is actually pretty good. We're very lucky, our weather's terrible. You know? We have a 2% loss because we have a cold, wet climate. Wet meaning not a lot of loss. We use most of the alcohol, which is 2% per year. When it comes to places like Taiwan, they've had reports as high as 20% apparently. That is per year again. So they can't even get to 10 years by that in the math of things. So it's all about that careful, what do we do? But they have an advantage over us. Their product will mature faster. So if they could get to 10 years, it will taste way older than any 10-year-old we have. But at 50 years, our whiskey is still around. We still have it at 50 years. We'll have lost about 65%, but it still exists. But that is the main reason why whiskey will cost a lot at an older age. But yeah, so older doesn't mean better. It can mean it's the best whiskey you ever had. Because we're all different, your individuality makes this decision. It could be your product. If you can afford it, even better. If not, sorry. But if you can afford it, feel free to hang out with me sometime, because that'd be great. But yeah, so it's all about that kind of exploration. Also, casks of different sizes. We've got a big sherry butt in the corner just there. That is 500 litres. The ratio of wood influence to the product is not going to be as great as a smaller cask, or even a smaller cask than this. An octave, for example. A wine octave cask is 50 litres. You know, so you can have a much better influence of the wood to the product. And a recent discovery is that if you fill the cask at a lower ABV at 60% or less, you have a better influence again as well. There's all these little things you can do to have an impression of older flavours in younger whiskies. And the reason why, the consumer. They want whiskey now more than ever. We are not making. After Lagavulin have had to ration their product to their distributors because they cannot make enough of it. You know, but it's all about that exposure, so you don't know who is doing what. And the thing is, age should be the guide, and not necessarily brand either, because brand recommendation is by a person's opinion. What should be done above all else is exploring them for yourself. And going up to that whiskey bar and saying the same thing you would do when you walk into any shop. You walk into a shop looking for oranges, you ask for oranges. That's what you do. You walk to the bar, you ask for the flavours you want to taste. You want a sweet whiskey, say vanilla, caramel, toffee. You want toffee apple, that's what you say. You want Christmas cake, that's a perfectly valid statement. Because alcohol, for one thing, is definitely present in cake, at least what my mother makes it. Alright? When it comes to the fruits. Fruits are from the actual previous product, sherry, wine, port. These are fruit-based, and that can soak into the wood and give influence to our whiskey. When it comes to the spices, European cancer high in tannins, the cinnamon, the nutmeg, this is how it works. Many a time I've heard people say it tastes like Christmas cake, and it's true. This is what's going to help you way more than anything else by following your instincts. So to sum up my advice, to sum up and finish off the tour, it's about being stubborn. It's about following your instincts. It's about being experimental and keeping open-minded, and it's about not listening to anyone else but me. Right? That's what it's about really deciding for yourself, not going with what someone told you, because it's not going to help you. So if you like smoked salmon, probably going to like smoky whiskeys. That's why I like smoky whiskeys. I love smoked foods. My wife hates them. Which means all smoky whiskeys and all smoked foods are all for me. So it's great. But yeah, so we are actually aging rum in our warehouse for example, in this case, Diamond Distillery in Guyana. And what's really good about this is we get to give quality wood to the rum and let it age, and then have influence from that rum in that cask that you can then use. And then we've got rum that actually, and it's winning awards. This stuff is turning heads. This stuff is delicious. And yes, some of my training was literally just sitting there for an hour and a half and listening to facts about alcohol and drinks. Perks of the job. But yeah, so it was brilliant, and I'm looking really forward to it. And I'm going to make a mince pie out of tropical fruits with it as well, because why not? But that's the thing, we're not following any norms. You know, we're actually getting in relationships with rum distilleries, getting involved with our product, having good source of wood for aging of theirs, and doing continental rum here. So instead of just doing it in a place like Liverpool, which is perfectly fine, but we can do it here where the environment can easily be just as good. So it's great, and we can just have a lot of fun. But no, I really hope that you actually learned something about doing something you didn't know before, which people like yourself is always a really fun challenge. So I hope there was at least one thing you didn't know. But no, I really hope you had a great time, most important, and that you did. But no, if you want to give us a review, that'd be amazing. We would love to hear what you thought of this, guys. If you want to see how amazing and beautiful this really is, that is completely acceptable in the review. If you want to see how amazing and beautiful I am, that is also completely acceptable. Yeah, even that'd be a bit weird to say about tour guide. But Stuart's the name, not you forgot, of course. But nonetheless, if you did not enjoy the tour in any way, shape, or form, the torture of an experience, make sure that the name that you use is not Stuart on the review, or better yet, don't bother with the review if you didn't like it. No, thank you so much, Dave.
Also ich bin hellauf begeistert. Unser Tasting Flight war ganz, ganz cool. Also eine richtig schöne Sache, wo wir die verschiedenen Sachen dann dort verkostet haben, die New Makes. Also Flavor matters, deshalb arbeiten sie auch dann, wie sie arbeiten. Was ich ganz cool fand, war, sie haben dann auf ihrer eigenen Bar viele von den neuen Brennereien. Warum der Glenfarclas da ist, weiß ich nicht. Gibt sogar ein Peated dort, New Make, was wir verkostet haben. Einige Leute fanden das ganz gut. Also, liebe Leute, unser Geheimnis in der Zukunft heißt Holyrood Distillery, Edinburgh. Wow!